Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Correspondence Certification course. Everyone can be seated. Of course, those of you that are coming in, please feel free to grab a chair. I hope everyone brought their books. Those of you that are watching online, I hope you've downloaded your book by now. If you don't have one, of course, now you can order one by going through our website, or you can also order one through our Facebook page there. You can get in contact with our public relations committee, and they'll let you know how to get a book, and they'll get one off to you. But if you don't have one, or if you're overseas, please feel free to download one, and download it now. That way you have it. It's free of charge. There's no charge for any of those things when it comes to downloading the PDFs, and it's the teacher's manual, which will be very important. As we've always stated, it's very important to the learning and the teaching, the implementation of this class, and getting over the information that the author himself wants us to have in our mind, as the front of every book says, to change the hearts and minds. Well, that starts with the teachers of the program and goes through the students who are future teachers. And it always rotates in that circle in that way. Students becoming teachers, and of course teachers are always students. And always remember that. We're going to be starting off on page 65, but since we've had a little bit of time off since our last class, we want to go back over to page 63. And we're going to just briefly cover this, and I would encourage anyone that did not get to see the class that David Knighton taught on September the 5th of 2001 to go back and watch it. He goes into detail covering page 62 and 63, and of course it's entitled, Who is a Friend, Choosing Friends, and Deciding to Be Friends. And it's very important information that he went into great detail and laid out for us. So we're going to briefly just kind of put some of it back in our minds tonight, because we're going to need it to move forward with what we're looking at as far as friendships and whether these friendships work out or not. And, well, is it even wrong if two people decide not to be friends? Is that a problem? Well, we'll talk about that tonight, because sometimes those can be the hardest things to deal with, is when two people aren't really doing anything wrong, but the outcome that one person would like to have doesn't work out the way that person anticipates. So it's important, though, to realize, remember, as we always talked about, life's full of choices, and they have to be made with positive character. Well, exactly who is a friend? Here on page 62, and once again, this is just some rehearsal to get our mindset to move forward tonight. Well, notice here, a friend is one who supports, respects, encourages, and accepts you as a unique individual. Friends can come in all shapes and sizes and from all walks of life. Friends can come from all nationalities and ethnicities. It's important not to cut yourself off from getting to know someone because they're different. Keep in mind that no two people are exactly alike. We are all unique human beings who share more similarities than differences. And if you remember, we covered the very small amount of differences that we have as a human race, no matter what nationality we are, ethnicity, it doesn't matter whether you're a Native American, an African American, or you're a Latino, a European. All of these things are irrelevant when it comes to people coming together and forming relationships, friendships. Of course, the foundation that makes this work or not work is positive character. If positive character is involved, everything else works itself out. If negative character is involved, color, skin's really irrelevant. Nationality is really irrelevant. It won't work. We showed that with the Civil War here in the United States back in the 1800s. You could all belong to one nation but have a different opinion. And, of course, it can be built on negative character, and a lot of people can get hurt and die. We see that not just in the 1800s. We see it every day in today's society. It still takes place. You can turn on the news and see it every day. Well, choosing friends, once again, here on page 62. So we talked about who is a friend. That's someone who respects, encourages, and accepts that you're a unique individual. And we're talking about from a positive standpoint. And it says choosing friends. Well, the importance of choosing positive friends cannot be overstated. Remember, we also use that with the power of an influence and also peer pressure. Those things cannot be overstated also, the power that they have and the effect that they have in our lives. Well, people with immoral principles and negative character as friends can influence you to make choices that you could regret for the rest of your life. And if you don't have it there, you can write page 60 for that definition of influences from the character unit, because that's where we learned that an influence is something that has the ability to change the way we think, feel, and act about something. And that could be a rule, it could be the way you view your parents, the way you view authority, or the way you view other people, the way you view the environment. And once again, remember when we talk about the environment and the peaceful solution, it's really important to understand that you hear a lot about global change, climate change, and globalization being things taking place to help bring climate under control. And we start tending to think that environment means water, air, trees, and that's part of it. But the environment also in the peaceful solution can be your family life, the school environment, the environment we have here in a classroom setting tonight, the environment of a city, the environment of a state. It's really the rules and the conduct of those rules, as we talked about in the 5th chapter of the character unit, that builds a society and creates the environment. The adherence or the breaking of those rules can create a stable environment or a very chaotic environment. So keep those things in mind. Along with influences, they have the power to change the way you think, feel, and act about something. And it could be anything. Well, learning to recognize the qualities that make a positive friend takes time and effort. So this is not something that you have to rush through. This is something you can take your time in doing. Avoid meeting someone and immediately deciding to accept this person as a friend. Take your time to learn about him or her first. Remember, just because someone has a great personality does not mean they have a positive character. When choosing friends, keep these things in mind and proceed with wisdom and caution. So remember, knowledge is power. We learned that on page 11. And as David said in his last class, knowledge is one thing. Knowing how to apply the knowledge to a situation, that's wisdom. You can have all the knowledge in the world and it won't benefit you unless you apply it in the proper way. One example that we use in schools, you can be going down the road and you can see your gas hand slowly going down as you're traveling, and all of a sudden the gas light comes on and you know that, well, I'll be out of gas soon. You have the money to put gas in your car. You're passing gas stations, so it's within your ability to put gas in your car, but you just keep driving. And then when you run out of gas and you're broke down on the side of the road, well, what took place? You had the knowledge, you had the ability, but you, for some reason, didn't use it. So you didn't use wisdom in keeping that car running. And that's just one thing we talk about, because even in making decisions, you can have the knowledge to do what's right, but the application shows wisdom. And the lack of application shows a lack of wisdom. It also shows a lack of self-control, as we'll get to as we move forward through this unit into the next. But looking over to page 63, and once again, we're just going to briefly read these. Once again, if you want to go through these in detail, I would encourage you to go back to the class before this one. That was 9/5/2021, and our teacher David went through these in detail, and he covered them very well, so we're just going to briefly overview them again. So deciding to be friends, and when we teach this in schools, we've had a lot of teachers say that, most people don't do this when they get married. Well, you're right. Most marriages don't work out in society today either, do they? It's as I said, I read one time in a book, a very popular author. He wrote that people have love at first sight and hate at first fight. And that's truly what takes place when these things aren't adhered to. And these aren't just relationship issues as far as marriage, but this is just being common friends. Being every day, whether it be in the workplace or the school environment. We're particularly talking about 11 to 15-year-olds here. So this is what we're teaching that people should do when becoming friends in their youth, because that's a very pivotal time in their life to where they can be influenced very, very easily, and it could be to their detriment or it could be to their success. So here on page 63 it says, is there someone you think you would like to be friends with? The following stages of interaction will help you decide if that person will make a perfect friend. And you can have more than one perfect friend. And perfect doesn't mean they don't have any flaws. If you're looking for someone with no flaws, then you'll never find a friend. And it's kind of unfair because we would have to be without flaws ourselves. But watch what we're talking about here, and we're talking about people who are practicing positive character. If someone is practicing negative character, that's what we're talking about as imperfections that we really don't want to deal with. But if they're practicing positive character, that's what we're looking for. That's a perfect friend, someone who's practicing positive character. Well, first you have the observation stage. And, of course, we want to observe that person's interaction with peers and adults, so with the teacher, also with other students, with their parents or whoever comes picks them up from school, or the school bus driver, so forth. Anybody that's in authority, watch how they behave. How someone treats others, especially when he or she is antagonized or frustrated, says a lot about his character or her character and personality. Be careful of those who are easily angered and take out their frustrations on others by being hostile, aggressive, or violent. So keep that in mind and think about that. If you're looking at someone and you're examining someone to be your friend, and they have outbursts where they yell and scream at people, demoralize people, put them down, that's someone you really want to consider not being a friend. Doesn't mean that person can't change. And if that person does change, you reevaluate that. But we need to think about that for ourselves, though. What if we do that? What if we have outbursts? What if we're aggressive towards others? What if we create an environment of hostility? We're really, as teachers, we're telling people, I'm not the ideal friend you'd want to be a friend with. So we want to be careful that we cover these things and we address these things. And if we see them in ourselves, it's something we need to deal with. And of course, being hostile and aggressive, well, that will lead to violence. And violence is where someone, aggressiveness is one thing, hostility is one thing, violence, that's rage. That's where people get harmed. That's where death can occur. These are things that we want to avoid. So if you are observing someone, and there's someone that, once again, when they're frustrated, they become hostile, aggressive, or violent, that's one strike. That's something you want to shelve that over, and if that person can deal with that in a better way, we'll reevaluate that. And then, of course, number 2. This is if you get past number 1. If you haven't got past number 1, you'll never get to number 2. Number 2, the introductory stage. Once you have observed that person to be respectful and well-mannered, you might choose to introduce yourself. Through conversation, you can learn more about each other. Talk about current events, your likes and dislikes. Keep your conversation respectful and appropriate. So notice you're conversating on your likes and dislikes. That's your personality that you're kind of talking about. Things you like, whatever, whether you like chocolate or vanilla, ice cream, whether you like summer or winter. It could be anything, what colors you like, whatever it is that you're talking about that brings you together in personality, because you're observing the character and you're discussing more. And as you learn about someone's personality, you're going to also learn about the character, but you have to be careful that you distinguish between the two. Of course, then we have the getting to know you stage. So this is if you choose to. So you've went through step 1 and step 2 and into step 3. And it says, listen carefully to what your potential friend says. What does he or she believe about moral principles? Those are rules, the application of rules. If your potential friend tells you that cheating is okay, or for fun she goes to the mall and shoplifts, then red flags should be going up. These are clear signals that you should proceed with caution. Try letting that person know that stealing is wrong, then tell them why. Explain the conflicts that it causes. Now notice here in the 3rd step, for you to be a true friend, it doesn't say if he or she goes to the mall and steals, cut ties with him and walk away. It actually tells you that you to let them know, hey, that's wrong. Actually try to be a true friend to them and point out that they're doing something that is wrong and you can change. And this is how you can change. And if that person decides they don't want to change, well, that's number 4 where we get to the deciding stage. It says, carefully consider if you want to pursue a friendship with someone who is dishonest or cheats and steals. It is a proven fact that you will be known by the company you keep. Someone who lacks moral principles can influence you to make wrong choices. So they have the power and they have the power and the ability to change the way you think, feel, and act about something. Where at one time you would not steal something, they can influence you to do so. It would be wise to decide to make friends only with people who have positive moral character. In this way, you will be influenced to make the right choice. So if you're around people that are practicing positive character, they have the ability to influence you to make the right decision. But of course, also, if you didn't underline this when David taught this, underline it, circle it, put parentheses around it, whatever you need to do, because this is what's going to carry us into our class tonight. It says the decision to build a friendship, notice, must be mutual. You must both want to be friends, because true friendship is never one-sided. And of course, he covered about how people will spend money and try to buy friends. And of course, the money will eventually run out and the friendship will eventually go away. You can't buy friendship. That's not based on positive character. Positive character is something you can't buy with money. You can't just go to the store and say, give me a couple pounds or a couple ounces or a couple gallons of positive character. Positive character, remember, comes from the value, imitate, practice we talked about in the character unit. It comes from learning and then imitating, practicing, and that's what makes us a very important person. It's something that we have to learn. Remember these positive character traits, as we talked about in both the acceptance unit and the character unit, they are developed skills. And you can't go buy a developed skill. If you could, people wouldn't go train to be plumbers, electricians. You wouldn't have to go to school for certain things. You could just go buy it and be done with it and know how to do it. You just crack your head open and pour the knowledge in. And if you remember on page 6 of the character unit, we had a cartoon there of someone pouring all this stuff into the mind. And it doesn't really work that way except through the pouring of words from a mouth to a student. The information going through the ears and entering the brain. That's one way of pouring knowledge into our minds, but you can't really crack open and instantaneously it's there. It's not like downloading a program and now you can do it. It takes work, it takes effort, and it takes a lot of hard work to get it done. So with that in mind, of course, David left off on page 64, and this was just an evaluation sheet, and we'll look at it again very quickly. And it said, fill out the information about one of your friends. And of course, this is something that you want to keep positive. You don't want to be writing negative things down. And on page 64, it told you to write down their name. How did you meet him or her? At what point did you realize that he or she was a friend? Was there someone special, or was there some special incident that occurred to bind your friendship? Write about the incident. Of course, then it followed up by writing a paragraph about what you value in a friend, what positive character traits do you think a friend should have, and why. And that's where David left off in the last class, so we need to turn back over. We're going to pick up on page 65, but before we do that, we're going to need to turn over to LP4D, because we're going to start procedure 4 tonight. And this is where we get our instructions as the teacher on how we need to present what it is we're going to present tonight. And it says, tell students that everyday interactions are the foundation from which they choose their friends. So everyday interaction is the foundation from which they choose their friends. Notice it's not the foundation of positive character. We're building up to that. It's not the foundation of communication. We've discussed that briefly, and we're going to move into that also. But this is the foundation from which they'll choose their friends. And all of these things tie in together, whether it be self-control, respect, and of course the implementation of what we're speaking of here. It says, explain that even though they have the intentions of getting to know someone, that person might not respond in a way they would like. Have students turn to page 65 of their handbooks and read the section entitled Barriers to Forming Friendships. Remind students that even though some might reject their desire to be friends, they should continue to maintain their self-worth, see value in themselves, and positive moral character. So they need to hold on to that. And always be polite to others, no matter how they are treated. Ask students how it feels to be rejected by someone they want to become friends with. Answers should include hurt, sad, embarrassed, disappointed. Explain that those are normal feelings, but there are ways to help you deal with rejection. And of course, then we'll have students turn to page 66 and read the section, "Here are a few helpful ways to deal with rejection." But first, we want to turn over to page 65. This is barriers to forming friendships. And of course, I want to read to you the definition of a barrier from Merriam-Webster's, because there's many different barriers that you see in life, and kind of communicate with the children. Let them identify barriers to them, and you can tell them that, you know, some barriers are temporary, like when they're coming to school and they cross the railroad tracks, and sometimes the train comes and you see the arms come down. Well, those are barriers to keep us safe. They're to let us know that there's a train coming down the train track, and as soon as the danger is gone, the barrier goes back up, it's clear to proceed. But if you try to get around those barriers, you can also pull some videos off of YouTube to show how dangerous it can be and how it doesn't work out very well sometimes. So sometimes barriers can keep us safe. There's also barriers that a lot of students will recognize that's on the front of a school bus. It's a little arm that kind of goes out when the school bus is stopped, and it extends about 6 foot, and that makes the students have to walk out in front of the school bus far enough to where the school bus driver can see the student. That's a barrier to keep them from coming up close to where they get out of sight of the teacher themselves, or the school bus driver themselves. But barriers can be positive or negative. And here in the Merriam-Webster's, it says definition of a barrier. And of course, it says something material that blocks or is intended to block passage. That can be highway barriers, or like we talked about, the barriers that come down for the railroad tracks. And then we have behavioral barriers. And that's something immaterial that impedes or separates. So something immaterial that impedes or separates. And, you know, when you make a decision, education can be a barrier. If you're educated, that can be a safety barrier that can keep you from going the wrong direction. That's a barrier that we need. Without that education, we could very easily go the wrong direction. And of course, the barriers to forming friendships, well, as we read, you'll see what I mean. Some barriers aren't always bad. Sometimes they're needed. And sometimes you could have two people that are doing nothing wrong, but it still just doesn't work out the way they would like, and there's still nothing wrong with it. It's just not going to work together. You can take oil and you can take water and you can mix it as much as you want. It's never going to mix. And some things in life are just like that. It doesn't mean that someone's done something wrong if it just doesn't go together. So notice here it says, as you grow and mature, and remember that maturity, that doesn't mean, you know, as you get hair on your lip or your muscles get bigger. It means as you learn to make decisions in a more adult way, in a more proper way. We start thinking more in the long-term effect. We're not in the here and now, but we start looking at how decisions affect us, not just today, but in our life to come. It says that you will have more interactions with others and greater opportunities to choose friends. You're going to get to know more people. And of course, in middle school, vastly different than high schools. And when you're teaching middle schools, remember, and you'll have to ask because some do and some don't, where I came from, the middle school that I went to, there were 4 elementary schools. And after 6th grade, we went to 7th grade, which everyone moved over to the middle school. All 4 elementary schools combined together to make up the one middle school. And from middle school to high school, it just continued on. The one middle school also made up the high school. But from 6th grade to 7th grade, you went from having 60 people in your class, which we had 2 classes of 6th graders, to the 7th grade, we went to having close to 400 people in the 7th grade. So the ability to make friends and to get to know more people was pretty much instantaneous. Of course, you tend to gravitate to the ones you knew, and then you made friends as you went through getting to know other people, but you kind of stuck closer to the ones that you knew to begin with. That's just part of growing up and being shy and learning how to fit into bigger crowds. But notice here, continuing on, it says, by now you have most likely experienced some disappointments in making friends. And I'm sure we've all been through that one way or another, disappointments in whether we wanted to be friends with someone and found out they're just not someone we should be friends with, or someone we wanted to be friends with and that person just wasn't interested in being a friend with us. Well, the truth is, finding positive friends can be a matter of trial and error. Now, notice positive friends. Didn't say negative friends. We should be very careful not to get caught up into the negativity. But positive friends, it can be a matter of trial and error. Sometimes you will have to face a few obstacles or barriers, but by accepting that these barriers exist and dealing with them in an appropriate way, you can make positive friends and be a positive friend to others. And as we go into this, think about these positive friends. Positive friends aren't always somebody that you're always around. You can have people that are positive friends and have friendships, and you might see them once a week, once a month, once a year, but you have some kind of common ground that you base something on. And if it's based on positive character, I have friends all around the world that I've never physically met. I've met them through peaceful solution classes in many different countries, and some people I've met through travels that I did not know, but you felt like you knew each other, even though you'd never seen each other face to face. But what brought us together was the peaceful solution. And then when you meet them, well, they're instantaneously, the friendship's already been, there's a bond that's already adhered to between two people. And that's what we have today in technology that we have in front of us. And of course, you can also have people that there could be some disagreements with. Doesn't mean you're going to shoot, stab, or beat each other. Just means that you might not be as close or working on, we tend to work on the peaceful solution in our travels. That's the only reason we travel. We don't really go on vacation. We just go to do things like this. So that could be who we look for. We can meet other people, but if their interest isn't the peaceful solution, we don't kind of get pulled off that way. But once again, when friendships don't work, dealing with rejection, I'm sure we've all experienced this to some degree. And it says, as hard as you might try, the person you want to be friends with might not want to be friends with you. Accepting that your personalities are not compatible, or that the other person is not interested in your friendship, it can be pretty hard to deal with. Now, this is speaking about personality, not even character. We've already talked about in character where if a person is aggressive, violent, that hinders a friendship right there, right from the go. But this is talking about two people that their personalities just don't come together. They have two different interests. They're just not gelling together. Well, if that person says that, you're an okay person, but I'm just not really interested in being your friend. Well, how does that work? Because a lot of people if you're not my friend, you're my enemy. And if you're not my enemy, you're my friend. And of course, if you're an enemy of my enemy, then you're my friend. That's today's society, right? That's the way countries seem to work. If you're an enemy of my enemy, then we're friends automatically. That's all it took. You just had to be an enemy of my enemy. Well, that's a very confused way of trying to bring peace, and it doesn't. And we see that it doesn't. But once again, if you have someone and they say, I'm not interested in being that person's friend, that's okay. When you get into 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, 99.9% of the time you're dealing with schools, they're talking about relationship issues. I mean, we're talking about 11-year-olds that are looking to make obligations for the rest of their life. And they think that way. And we've had teachers and guidance counselors come to us and say, we need you to really talk about how the young men and young women, it wasn't just young men doing it, but they were abusing their mate that they had took in school in a relationship. And here you have someone 11, 12 years old and they're already physically beating other people. Well, that's not a personality conflict, that's a character conflict. But these are things that you're going to deal with in school, and you're going to have to work this around when you're teaching it to kind of address both issues. Because if a young lady, and we'll just use a lady as an example, a young girl, if she comes from a family, and you see this young girl right here, And if you remember that picture there, well, it should be familiar to you. That's the same one we use on page 55 with negative selfish relationships hurt. It's the very same picture. And when you look at that, you can tell this person is heartbroken. You know, the way their whole body language shows they're just, you know, it's like they're getting ready to crumble as a person. It's like the self-worth is gone. You can just look at that picture and feel the body aching and shaking and the hurt that's in the heart. And of course, when you turn back over to page 55 and you see that it talks about these negative selfish relationships hurt, notice here on page 55, just for your reference here, this is why if someone turns you down and they don't want to be your friend, this is one of the first things we need to accept, that it's okay, because I could end up going off the wrong path. Even though that person's not doing anything negative, they just don't want to be my friend. On page 55, the first paragraph, notice if someone doesn't want to be your friend, notice it says these type of relationships can cause serious psychological damage, fear, and distrust. And it's talking about when people tear you down by devaluing your worth. Any relationship where you're abused verbally, physically, emotionally, or sexually is negative, but it talks about psychological damage. Well, that's something we have to be careful of when someone doesn't want to be our friend. We feel rejected. We can't let that psychologically break us down, or as we talk to children, it's a lot easier to say that when you've been through school and as an adult, you kind of learn how to manage, and do you realize that, you know, as you're talking to students, when you're 11 years old, think about the friends that you have, and even with social media, I think today, friends I had at 11 years old, I haven't talked to any of them in probably 25 or 30 years. And I still consider them, if they would send me a message, I would be more than glad to talk to them, but I kind of stay busy, so I don't really get out on social media that much. I don't really send messages out. But it's there. I mean, I can see them sometimes on social media as they give friend suggestions. But, you know, and you hope they do okay, but it's just not something we have everyday contact with. And then someone is asked, are you saying that if someone's 14 years old, they couldn't find the love of their life? Well, if they do it the right way, they could. You know, and I'm one that can vouch for that. I married the person that I met at 14 years old. But it has to be done the right way. And I've learned a lot along the way. And it wasn't always me doing the teaching. A lot of times it was me doing the learning on how to conduct myself and to be a better person. And that's something that actually helps to build that relationship, is realizing that two people have to be a benefit to each other. But the relationships have to be built in a right way. And this is something that we covered in the last chapter. On page 53, you'll see building relationships, and then you have rules, rules, rules. There are rules to building relationships. And notice here where it says rules, 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 it says, whether you are aware of it or not, all relationships, both professional and personal, have rules or guidelines that govern behavior and interaction. So you can form long-lasting relationships if they're according to the rules that govern them. And it has to be built upon positive character. And these things can be beneficial. But once again, getting someone at that age to understand that they're rejecting you as a friend, but 5 years from now, you're going to have many more friends. 2 years from now, by the end of the school year, you will have many friends. This one person, you'll see them, but they'll be a distant memory eventually in your life. But when the person is young, they don't see it that way. And it can be it can be a psychological challenge. But notice here it says, back on page 65, dealing with rejection is never easy. You know, and you can think about adults get that way when they go try to get that brand new sports car and they get rejected for their loan. You know, the life, it's just not worth living in. I don't even know why I go to work now. You know, and you think about, we as adults do that. And then you have children that, you know, you're talking about 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And then look at what goes on in adults' life. You know, I just, on the way to class tonight, I was listening to the news on my radio, and it was talking about a very popular, I think it's Late Show. I've never seen his show, but his name is Jeffrey Corbin. And they were just saying that he was able to get a restraining order against a woman that keeps showing up on his doorstep saying she wants to marry him. Jeffrey Corbin said, well, you know, the first problem that I have is my wife is standing right behind me as she's saying this. So obviously he's not going to be marrying this lady. You know, he's already in a relationship with his wife. And this lady is on the front doorstep saying that, no, you're going to be mine. Well, he had to get a restraining order against this person. You know, and this is a person that, this is more of a character issue, but when you start seeing what goes on in society, you know, just research these things, stalking and so forth. All these are negative character traits. These things are not just negative, they're illegal. You can go to jail for these things. And these are things that we should practice not doing. We should practice in moving forward, being a better person, and taking advantage of all the opportunities that we have in life. Because we all have a lot. We all have a lot, and something will always work out. Might not be what we want, but something will always work out. And in the end, if we keep the rules, you know, a joyful life is guaranteed. It's guaranteed if we keep the rules. So continuing on here, after we talk about the questioning of self-worth, it says you might ask yourself questions such as, why doesn't she like me? Or why doesn't he like me? You know, what's wrong with me? Why would someone not want to be friends with me? Or why does he not want me on his team? You know, this can take place when you're out on the playground and you're picking teams, and of course the last person usually knows they're not great at sports, so they're kind of laughing the whole time people are picking. But there's some people that, you know, well, why didn't you pick me? Or once again, continuing on, it says that you might even do a quick breath check or check the mirror to make sure you don't have something stuck in your teeth, you know, because once again, you know, there's something wrong with me if that person doesn't want to be my friend. And that's not necessarily true. You know, you'll learn, I always tell students, especially the guys, listen, I'm going to tell you something very quickly that you're going to learn that is a barrier, and you can be a person in a relationship. You can have a wife, and there's something that she can say, hey, I want to go do this. Do you want to go? And you immediately go, no, I want nothing to do with it. And that's, I want to go shopping for clothes. You want to go? No. My idea of a man, I know what my size is. I pick it up, I look at it, I put it in the bag, 15 minutes, I'm out of the store. Doesn't work that way for women. It can be hours of looking and holding and looking and holding, and that's okay if that's what they do. You know, me, I just tend to buy and go. I don't have time for, to me, I feel I don't have time to spend like on things like that. But I tell them there's going to be things that, you know, and they usually bring up, they'll bring up examples of what their parents do that they don't like to do. One was this young man, he didn't like going fishing, but his dad always wanted to go fishing, and oh no, I don't want anything to do with that. You know, I'm kind of the same way with hunting. I'm not a hunter, but I have a lot of people in my family that are. People ask me all the time, do you want to go hunting? And the answer is no before they ever get the last part of the word out of their mouth. I just have zero interest in it. Doesn't mean that I don't want to be their friend, but at that time, I'll be your friend. I just want nothing to do with what you're doing. And that's not saying that what you're doing is wrong. I'm just not interested in it. And those are some things that we can talk about where someone just doesn't want to go somewhere with you. And you feel kind of rejected. You know, you feel like, well, why does he want to go with me? He'd probably go with somebody else. Not really, no. When you think about some things, there's some things that we're just not interested in. Personality. Not a character, but a personality. You know, I'm the kind of person that if there was a something that they were talking about in an educational kind of forum, I'd be more than glad to go. But I've got people who I know would look at me and go, no. And I got people I know I could call and they would go, yeah, when are we going? And we've done that before. We've driven 1,500 miles just to go hear a speech before. Just to see what people had to say. And these were very prestigious places where people speak to just kind of get the facts and find out what's being said. And there's some people that would, no way I'm going with you. So you have friends in different areas too, different likes and dislikes. Once again, continuing on, it says you can try desperately to find a way to solve the problem. And this is someone rejecting us as a friend, and it could be in just one instance. So that you can be this person's friend. So you're finding desperately, you're searching, what is wrong with me? What can I do? How can I get this person to like me? The truth is, your personality might not be the problem. The other person might not be the problem either. Sometimes things don't turn out the way you don't want them to. Sometimes things don't turn out the way you want them to. And as hard as that might be to accept, it really is just a part of life. So once again, you can have people that neither one of them is doing anything wrong. And you can be examples of someone that, a friend of a friend is going. You want to go? I have no interest in that. And someone can be offended because you refuse to go in that situation. So it's not always talking about the person wants nothing to do with me. It can be situational kind of situational decisions, whether a person wants to go or not. Or it can be that a person just doesn't want to be around someone. That doesn't mean to mistreat someone, and that doesn't mean to do things against them to harm them. If you don't want to be a friend with someone, that's okay, but that doesn't mean to do anything negative to hurt them. And that's very important to remember also. So once again, sometimes things don't turn out the way you want them to, as hard as that might be to accept. It's really just a part of life. The most important thing is to find ways to deal with rejection that will not cause you to feel depressed or cause you to hurt yourself or others. And of course, here on page 66, and this is once again, we're finishing up procedure 4 here. Here are a few helpful ways to deal with rejection. And once again, all of us are going to face some form of rejection in our life. Whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, it's going to come. But here, remember we had on page 63, so you can tie these together. Page 63, you had the 4 stages to deciding to be friends. Well, here you have 4 helpful hints to deal with rejection. The first one is remember the stages of interaction. That's page 63 that I just mentioned. Those are the 4 things we just read about to start class. It says, keep in mind that there are stages leading up to friendships. Until you both decide, once again, remember it has to be mutual. Until you both decide that you want to be friends, you're simply getting to know each other. And once again, these are 2 people that want to get to know each other. Someone can simply say, I'm just not interested in knowing you. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It's perfectly acceptable. So until you both decide that you want to be friends, you are simply getting to know each other. You feel rejected because you assume the other person feels the same way you do. And William covered this in the rules of the difference between professional and personal relationships, where some people can confuse just a smile as something more than what it really was. Especially when you get into these things take place amongst teachers just like they do students in school environments, and guidance counselors will tell you. It's where people can have a smile or open a door and greet someone in a way, and that person goes, wow, they really like me. And this can take place really young people. Someone can be nice to them, and that person likes me as much as I like them. The way they just said hello this morning, that made the difference. Well, we can read a lot of things into certain situations, and to do that, you have to take the deciding factor, the 4 stages of making a friend, and you got to throw all that out the door, because now you're going off of just the way they said it. That was it. There's no getting to know. There's no checking out the person's character. We kind of get rid of that, and that's not the way it should be done. So let's not be gullible and thinking just because the person smiles at us that it's more than what it is. You can make a person extremely uncomfortable by implementing or kind of insinuating that, well, this is what you meant. And it's become something in society today to where you have sexual harassment has become one of the biggest things in business when it comes to interaction between people, to where businesses are now separating men from women, and that hasn't stopped the sexual harassment either. You know, there's still sexual harassment that takes place even though that's done. And human resources has become a very busy political and legal spots in all businesses. So keep that in mind. You know, you feel rejected because you assume the other person feels the way you do. Well, I'm sure we all know what assume means. You can look at it there and figure it out for yourself. It can be very difficult to be in that position. Here in number 2, it says, remember that there are other fish in the sea. There are over, you can mark out that 6 right there. It shows how dated our book is. That's what 20 years ago. We've almost reached 2 billion more people in the world in 20 years. That's amazing. But we're at almost 8 billion people. You know, there are over 6, or really, they're right at 8 billion people in the world. If you practice treating people with respect and follow what you've learned in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, you know, you're guaranteed to gain not just a few friends, but many friends. Very, I would say, you know, relationships worth more than money, worth more than anything. When you build a friend based on positive character through what we learn here in the program, people that are in this program can, you know, they can kind of give testimonials to the fact you can build strong friendships throughout the whole world that, you know, would last you a lifetime. And then, of course, you have 3 here, and it says to continue to value your positive moral characteristics. So if someone rejects you, you know, you don't want to think, well, maybe if I just do something to get their attention that's negative. Maybe if I just do something to impress them, that'll make friends. Well, no, you want to continue to value. You know, you deem it important to you to have this positive character. And we've talked a little bit about reputations, but we'll get into how reputation, it can take a 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old. You haven't lived that long, but you've worked your whole life to stay positive. You can throw it away pretty quick, and that can hang with you all the way throughout high school, even into college if you decide to go to college. So continue to value your positive moral characteristics. Being the best that you can be does not mean that everyone will appreciate you. Often when people feel rejected, they decide that in order to fit in and earn friends, they have to change their positive character and personality. Notice here, don't do that. Don't ever do that. Real friends will appreciate your positive moral characteristics and accept you for who you are and for what you stand for. And remember what we read over here in the 3rd stage of getting to know you, and then getting on to the 4th stage, the deciding stage. The 3rd stage in the getting to know you, a true friend actually would tell you that what you're doing is wrong and try to offer you a way to fix it. So if you have to do something that's wrong and that person's going to agree with you doing something wrong, once again, you've left your four stages to determine whether that person would be a positive friend. Now you're compromising your own character to win that person over to be your friend. And if you have to do something in a negative way to get a person to be your friend, then that friendship is not worth having. One of you or both of you is going to suffer in that situation. You know, one of the biggest things that you'll see with a lot of the youth is they'll think that, well, I can change that person. Even adults think that. I can change that person. If you just let me have the shot, I can change that person. Well, it's not like there's not other people trying to help that person. You know, it's not like there's not other people trying to help people make better decisions. And in the end, we have to realize there is someone that can change that person. And it's that person. They're the only one that can change themselves. Now, you can offer educational standpoints, as the Peaceful Solution does, and guidance counselors and teachers and parents. You can offer suggestions and different ways to improve a person. But when it comes to changing someone, that person is the only one that can change them. I'm the only one that can change me, and you're the only one that can change you, because we're supposed to be in control of what comes into our lives, what we let into our minds and what we let into our environment, our community, our circle, so to speak. So we have to be mindful of all of those things, and this deception of, I can change that person to be a better person. Well, you might be able to help if you're educated to do it, but you can't. There's a lot of people that they say that about others, and then they get depressed because they couldn't change them. Well, they didn't have a realistic goal. And we spoke about that before too. Our goals have to be realistic. And when setting friends, we have to deal with realistic measures, and realistic choices, and realistic goals. You can say that, man, I'd really like to be friends with Governor of Texas. I really support the man. And I'm sure there's some people that don't say that, but just say if you did. We've been down to meet the governor before at the state capitol. You're not just going to go, hey, can you tell him Chris is here? He's expecting me. No, he's not. You need to leave. He's my friend. Yeah. And how's he your friend? I voted for him. Oh, okay. Well, so did about 7 or 8 other million people. Yeah. Leave. It doesn't work that way. Once again, it's a building relationship. And we've been places to where we've been rejected. You can't let that bother you. You just go, well, in our situation, it was, well, who's the second most important person that will meet with us? And then eventually we finally got chief of staff, which was like the 5th or 6th most important person, but we finally got somebody. And all we want to do is talk about character education. And it wasn't Governor Abbott. I think it was Governor Perry at the time where we went. And we actually did eventually meet with all these people after they had their staff get to know us. What are they about? What do they want? What are they doing? Are they doing what they said? And after they got to know us, after 3 or 4 trips, we finally get our meetings with people. But they did the same thing. They wanted to know, well, what are you doing and what are you about? And that's what their chief of staff's job was to do. Gather the information, find out what they're doing. When they leave, check and see what they're doing. Make sure they're doing what they say. And then if they come back, we'll meet with them. And that's how it's always worked, even with situations like that. They go through the very same process. Well, number 4 here, it says, don't feel like you have to get even with someone because they reject you. And this is probably one of the most important parts here of when someone chooses not to be your friend, is not bringing harm on that person or yourself. And I stress that, or yourself. Remember, you learned that one example of a healthy interaction is respecting someone's right to their opinion. Accept that people will form their own opinions about you as they learn what you stand for. You shouldn't be concerned about trying to make others like you. The most important thing is to have a positive moral character which you display towards others at all times. Many others, will learn of you and will desire your friendship. And when you think about what life would be like if you had to change yourself. You've established yourself in a positive way and you're choosing positive character. And all of a sudden, now you're having to change who you are for someone to like you. Does that person really like you if you have to change who you are to get them to show you attention? There's a lot of people out there that will like you, and getting this across to a young person can be a challenge. They'll like you just for who you are, just for you being you. They will like you. And that's the kind of friends you want. You don't want friends that make you feel like you have to do something to get their attention, or you have to kind of be this one certain person that you're really not. And you can even feel uncomfortable being that way. There's plenty of people out there that will like you for who you are. But this not getting even with someone because they reject you, there's a few things that we want to make a notation of, and we also put this in the mind of the students, because the very first thing that takes place when someone feels rejected and someone doesn't want to be their friend, and of course they don't see why that person doesn't like me, the first thing they want to do is start gossiping about that person. Saying something bad. Well, if that person doesn't like me, they must la da 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 da. And they start slandering. And we talk about the damaging of a person's reputation. If someone doesn't want to be your friend, we have to accept the fact that's okay. There's plenty of other people to be friends with. And if that person chooses not to be your friend and you choose to keep a positive character, you shouldn't be going around gossiping and saying negative things about a person just because they chose not to be your friend. That's not using positive character. That's using negative character. And that's changing who you really know you should be just to kind of suffice and make yourself feel better, which it won't make you feel better to demoralize someone else or to slander someone else. There's a misconception that it made me feel better now, but it won't make you feel better when other people realize that you're doing this, and they won't want to be your friend either because they know that you have negative character. You won't be able to get through the 4 stages of a person choosing a friend if you're slandering or putting down other people. And we can all very easily fall victim to that and do that. And that's something we have to guard against in dealing with this rejection. Notice here on the very bottom it says, you can be just as great as a friend to yourself as you are to someone else. And that's something that we have to remember, this self-respect and self-value that we'll get in, or self-worth, that we'll get into even more. If we don't respect ourselves, no one else is going to respect us. It's hard to respect, and I say that, think of someone that does drugs, and they refuse to stop doing the drugs, and they're disrespecting themselves. Well, you'll find that other people will quit trying to help after a while. Because you won't help yourself, other people give up. But if you'll show just the smallest of energy towards becoming a better person, towards doing the right thing, towards making the right choice, then, of course, you should always be able to find help. And as a human being, you should always be able to receive respect. You don't have to earn it. Relationships is like honesty. You have to work hard. You have to, relationships that develop, that grow to be strong and bound, and they're intertwined, and it's these rules that we talked about. These rules, that's what tie these relationships together. That's what we want to get in the mind of youth. Positive character can tie, bind, and bound relationships together so tight that even if someone comes to gossip and slander about you, when they say something about you, a true friend would go, I don't know where you heard that from. That's not true. I know that person. No, absolutely not. No. It wouldn't be somebody, a true friend wouldn't hear something that is wrong and go, oh, really? I didn't know they did that. And then they go tell other people. That's not a true friend. So think about that. We're going to stop right here because we're going to have our starting point to start off the next procedure on page 67. But please keep in mind all of these things that we talked about and realize that those stages to building friendships are very important. You don't have to rush them. You can take your time. In fact, you have to take your time. To go through those proper stages, it takes time. It's not an overnight thing. You don't go home and go through all 4 stages at once. It takes a period of time to form these relationships or friendships. And then you might get into the 3rd stage and realize, no, not going to work out. I think I'd rather just kind of go a different way. And that's okay. So once again, thank you all for coming. We're going to start our next class on page 67. Our next class will be this Wednesday, which is the 15th. I think the 15th. Is that right? 13th, 14th? Yes, 15th. So 9:15, it will be at 5:30 p.m., and we'll start on page 67. Thank you for coming.